Good evening, and thank you for attending my lecture recital about polyphonic elements in Martin Bresnick's piano music. The lecture will consist of a brief biography of the composer, an annotated list of his piano works, and a focus on the stylistic elements of the pieces Ishi song and Extraña Devoción. Before we begin, I would like to recognize and thank my committee members, Dr. Mark Clinton, Dr. Brenda Riston, Professor David Neely, and Dr. Stephen Barrett. Now, I will provide some background information about Martin Bresnick. Martin Bresnick is a living American composer. He was born in 1946 and is currently based in New Haven, Connecticut, as a professor in the practice of composition at the Yale School of Music. Bresnick received his undergraduate degree from the University of Hartford, Connecticut in 1967. He completed his Master's of Music in 1968 and a Doctoral of Musical Arts degree in 1972 at Stanford University. Apart from his studies in the United States, Bresnick attended the Academy of Music in Vienna from 1969 to 1970. During his studies, he worked under Georgi Ligeti, John Chowning, and Gottfried von Einem, among others. Bresnick composes in various genres, including opera, orchestral works, film scores, chamber music, solo piano, and computer music. Bresnick's works have been recorded and released by New Focus Recordings, Tall Poppies Records, Starkland Records, Cantaloupe Music, Composers Recordings, among others. As for Bresnick's music, Carl Fischer Music Publishers serve as the exclusive publishing house for all of his compositions. Bresnick has received many awards and prizes throughout his illustrious career, including the Fulbright Fellowship in 1969 to 1970, the Rome Prize Fellowship in 1975 to 1976, Charles Ives Living Award in 1998, ASCAP Foundation's Aaron Copland Prize in 2000, the Berlin Prize Fellow in 2001, and the Guggenheim Fellowship in 2003. The genres of folk, blues, and rock and roll were formative in Bresnick's youth and significantly influenced his later compositions. Prior to composing, Bresnick studied classical oboe and also played oboe in rock ensemble. In addition to his inspiration from folk music, blues, and rock and roll, Bresnick maintains a deep love and respect for the composers in the Western classical traditions and models his compositions after these artists. Bresnick asserts that the music of J.S. Bach is his gold standard for composition, alongside of the music of Franz Schubert, Robert Schumann, Johannes Brahms, Frédéric Chopin, Claude Debussy, Bela Bartok, Sergei Prokofiev, and Georgi Ligeti. Bresnick's piano compositions were published between 1964 and 2015 and feature an array of compositional frameworks. Some of his pieces utilizes 12-tone serialism, free atonality, or blues form as a structural basis. Another of his piano works is based on Native American folk music and tribal history. Other pieces represent multimedia projects, reductions of the composer's work, and synthesis of his works and those of other composers whom he admires. This vast collection of styles brings tremendous variety to Bresnick's compositional output. Bresnick's piano repertoire was primarily composed for his wife, the talented pianist Lisa Moore. Therefore, his compositional methodologies have benefited from her input. It is also worth noting that among his solo piano works, 4 short piano pieces is the only composition that Bresnick wrote prior to his appointment at the Yale School of Music. The composer's 6 pieces for solo piano include 4 short piano pieces, The Dream of the Lost Traveler, Willie's Way, Extraña Devoción, Ishi Song, and Bundists. 4 short piano pieces is composed in 1964 and 1968. The first 3 pieces were composed and written in 1964, and the last in 1968. These pieces utilize free atonality and mimic the style of J.S. Bach's 2-part inventions. The Dream of the Lost Traveler, composed in 1997, is part of a larger multimedia project called For the Sexes, The Gates of Paradise. The purpose of the project is to narrate William Blake's poem from his book For the Sexes, The Gates of Paradise. Willie's Way was composed in 2006. Willie's Way is a transcription of an ensemble work called Fantasy on a Theme by Willie Dixon. It is a work that combines blues elements with Brahmsian hemiola features. Extraña Devoción, for solo piano, composed in 2010, is a transcription of a movement from a concerto collection narrating Francisco de Goya's etchings. The collection is called Caprichos Enfaticos. Ishi Song was composed in 2012 and is based on a Native American cultural history. The work combines pentatonic tonalities and minimalism. His last piece, Bundist, Robert, Georgia, and Me, composed in 2015, is a combination of works by composers who belong to a Bundist group. Specifically, this work quotes and recontextualizes elements of Schumann's David Spüler Danse, Opus 6, number 4, and Ligeti's Autumn in Versailles. From his piano compositions, I will highlight the similar compositional approaches of Extraña Devoción and Ishi Song. These works were composed 2 years apart and contain polyphonic features derived from the Baroque era and prominent in Ligeti's atmospheres. György Ligeti's repertoire from the 1960s reflects his interest in controlling each musical element independently. These separate elements cohere into a large-scale structure in a process termed micropolyphony. In short, micropolyphony is a compositional strategy invented by Ligeti to control a polyphonic texture's overarching sonic shape, resulting in a cluster of chromatic sounds. These clusters are polyphonic lines whose density renders them indistinguishable. Each line has an identical series of pitches, but a differing rhythmic pattern. For example, Ligeti's atmosphere portrays the complex texture generated by strands of descending, meandering chromatic lines. Here is an example of how Ligeti uses micropolyphony in atmospheres, starting from rehearsal letter C. I will play a recording of this very section of atmospheres performed by Berlin Philharmonic under the baton of Simon Rattle. Bresnick was highly influenced by this exceptional approach to polyphony in his compositions, especially in Extraña Devoción and Ishi song. I have elected to focus on Bresnick's polyphony because he employs similar micropolyphonic strategies to those Ligeti used in Atmosphere. However, unlike Atmospheres, Bresnick ensures that individual lines are heard throughout each piece, providing a unique and complex soundscape for performers and listeners. I will now introduce the background of each piece and illustrate the polyphonic features that distinguish these pieces from Ligeti's concept of micropolyphony. In 2007, Extraña Devoción was composed based on an etching in Francisco de Goya's famous Caprichos Enfáticos, or emphatic caprices. The etching portrays a group of Spanish citizens kneeling and praying while a donkey pulls a bear with a corpse in a transparent coffin down the street, as seen above. According to Bresnick, the donkey is mute, but the expression of the townsfolk reveals the sincerity and futility of the people's faith. Extraña Devoción for solo piano is a work dedicated to Robert Blocker of the Yale School of Music. Blocker requested a brief solo work from each of Yale's composition faculty. Therefore, Martin Bresnick selected Extraña Devoción from his compositions of Caprichos Enfáticos, composed in 2007, and arranged the movement for solo piano in 2010. As mentioned earlier, Extraña Devoción is one of 8 movements comprising a concerto collection called Caprichos Enfáticos, inspired by Goya's etchings. With the exception of Extraña Devoción, which was later arranged for solo piano, the entire series is scored for piano and percussion quartet. The 8-movement work is performed alongside a display of Goya's etching and is about 35 minutes in length. Extraña Devoción is based on a single melodic line that repeats throughout the work, as seen in the 17th century Chaconne Passacaglia. However, Bresnick's solo piano arrangement of this piece sets it apart from the other movements by highlighting its stately, expressive nature and processional pulse. Bresnick wrote all 8 movements of the Caprichos Enfáticos with 2-sided instruments in mind. For example, the vibraphone has one side comprised of white diatonic notes, while the other side includes the pentatonic black keys. Since the piano also has opposing white and black keys, Bresnick used this duality to combine opposing melodies into the piano part of Extraña Devoción. The music in Extraña Devoción evokes the emotions and activities portrayed in Goya's etching. The original composition for percussion and piano incorporated the sounds of prayer, a processional march down the street, the atmosphere of the bustling scene, and the church bells. Additionally, in the original composition, the chimes and vibraphone provided the effect of the church bells, bringing the etching to life. In this arrangement, because a single instrument plays all the voices, Bresnick suggested that the pianist utilize tone and touch to imitate the sounds of the instrumentations from the original compositions. Bresnick has acknowledged that Extraña Devoción shares similarities with Chopin's Prelude, Opus 28. The most notable influences are from number 15 in D-flat major, in which the slow, sustained rhythms imitate a funeral procession, Bresnick's admiration for Chopin motivated him to create something that shared stylistic elements with the composer's work. I will now perform an example of both of the examples from Chopin Prelude Opus 28, number 15 in D-flat major from the Poco Pio Animato section, followed by Bresnick's Extraña Devoción, starting at rehearsal letter B. In Extraña Devoción, Bresnick overlaid several melodic lines through the compositional technique of micropolyphony. As mentioned previously, micropolyphony is a compositional strategy used to control the overarching sonic shape of a polyphonic texture, resulting in a cluster of chromatic sounds. There are 6 distinctive motifs from the original composition present in Extraña Devoción. The original composition contained many layers of motivic material, and the variety of timbres imitated the atmospheres of Goya's etching. The first motif is the piece's primary motif, which uses syncopated rhythms across the descending stepwise motion. The motifs begin and end on B and repeat throughout the movement in the style of a chaconne passacaglia. This diatonic melodic material is introduced in the pianist's left hand in measure 11 and conjures the feeling of the processional as seen in Chopin's Prelude Opus 28, number 15. The second motif is a chimes motif. This occurs at every rehearsal letter of the piece. The third motif is the vibraphone and percussion motif. The fourth motif is on F-sharp pentatonic. The fifth motif is played on white diatonic keys. And the sixth motif in the red box is played on F-sharp pentatonic. I will now perform these motifs one by one, starting from the first motif through the sixth motif. When the motifs of the diatonic white keys and the pentatonic black keys combine, they create a dissonant soundscape, resulting in a sort of bitonality. Similar to Ligoti's use of chromaticism in his execution of micropolyphony, these combined motifs create a chromatic cluster. However, in Extraña Devoción, Bresnick's focus was to narrate the story of the etching. Therefore, each motive represents a narrative element and timbral effect, and retains a singular sound even when merged. Before we move on, I want us all to listen to a short clip of Lisa Moore performing Extraña Devoción with the percussion quartet in its original arrangement to hear the timbre and textures of the piece, along with Francisco de Goya's etching in the background. The next piece, Ishi song, is a piano work based on the story of a Native American man who lived in Northern California and went by the name of Ishi. Bresnick had never considered this subject until an Italian pianist named Manuel Arciuli commissioned him to compose a piece based on Native American culture. Bresnick drew inspiration from a film about Ishi's life. Ishi was from the Yahi people, a southern group of the Yana who lived in the Deer Creek region of Northern California. He was alive during the early 1900s. Anthropologists Alfred Kroeber and Thomas Talbot Waterman of the University of California identified Ishi as the last known Native American of the Yahi people. The anthropologists immediately brought Ishi back to the University of California with them and gave him his name. Ishi in the Yana language means man. The university's anthropologists and physicians studied Ishi, inquired about his tribal ways of life, and recorded the stories and songs he shared with them. Ishi died in 1916 from tuberculosis. However, more research has emerged since Bresnick composed this work, and scholars have recognized tribes related to the Yahi who still live in California. Therefore, Ishi is no longer considered the last of his people, but was rather one member of a dwindling population. Because he was long believed to be the last of his tribe, the story of Ishi became famous in California. Bresnick mentioned that when he was a student at Stanford, little children in the region were familiar with the tale. Ishi's song attained popularity because people had warm feelings toward the man and felt guilty for the oppression that happened to his family and his people. Ishi's song remains a personal, significant piece to Bresnick because the composer feels a kinship with Ishi's solitariness and cultural isolation. His mother and grandmother were the only ones who could speak the language of his origins. Like Ishi, Bresnick's mother and grandmother are the last of his family to be able to communicate in their native tongue, which ensures that this work is incredibly close to his heart. Ishi's song, like Extraña Devoción, is rooted in the form of a pasacalia and chaconne. Bresnick begins the piece with a musical incipit, a popular opening gesture from the medieval and Renaissance era. The incipit contains an excerpt of the melody transcribed from a recording of Ishi singing the Maidu Doctor song. There is no known translation available, primarily because Ishi was one of the last indigenous speakers of the Yahi Yana language. Pianists are expected to play and sing the incipit given. The tune serves as the foundation of this composition because it reoccurs throughout the piece. The Maidu Doctor song is comprised of 3 pitches, which is E, D, and B. Bresnick highlights these pitches by employing G pentatonic, D pentatonic, and E pentatonic, which feature them as common tones. This focus on the pitches of the Maidu Doctor song makes the modulation between each tonal center seamless. Bresnick uses 5 different motifs in this piece. The first motif is the main tune of Ishi's song based on G pentatonic. The second motif is written in D pentatonic, and the third motif in A pentatonic. The fourth motif returns to G pentatonic, and the fifth motif is constructed on D pentatonic. I will now play the motifs one by one, starting from motif 1. These 5 motifs appear sequentially in their original form at the beginning of the work. Later in the piece, the motifs are combined using the process of micropolyphony, Some of the motivic material maintain its original form, particularly motif 1, which remains unaltered until measure 109. However, the other motifs undergo changes in specific notes, rhythmic density, and tonal center. For example, the motifs converge in their original forms in measure 41 to measure 42, with the exception of motif 2, which is presented as part of the bass line of the fourth motif. The fifth motif is distinguished by Bresnick's propensity to pay homage to music he loves. While Ishi's song is based on a Native American folk song, Bresnick quotes the classic rock standard, The Way It Is, by Bruce Hornsby and the Range. Instead of landing the motif on the downbeat, he syncopates it. Before I show you the recording of The Way It Is, I would like to play the fifth motif on the piano, followed by the motif present in The Way It Is. At times, in Ishi's song, the rhythmic pattern of Ishi's tune change or omit notes. However, in these instances, Bresnick uses secondary melodic lines to complete the rhythm of the original tune. Moreover, as the piece progresses, Bresnick employs the motivic pattern of Ishi's tune as a rhythmic ostinato, which alternates between the foreground and the background. In measure 35 to 36, Bresnick distinguishes the tune within these dense lines, with pitches appearing in multiple layers, creating the visual illusion that the tune is no longer present. However, when all voices are combined, it is evident that the tune remains intact amidst the multi-layered structure. Although the tune is concealed during polyphonic moments, it returns to the foreground several times, slowly gaining prominence by doubling its layers until the climax of the piece, which is stated clearly in measure 81 through 84. Bresnick's use of micropolyphony in Ishi song resembles Ligeti's compositional techniques in atmospheres due to his method and melodic manipulation and augmentation. The primary tonal differences between Ishi song and atmosphere is that the former employs pentatonic tonality, while the latter relies on densely scored chromatic writing. Rhythmically speaking, atmospheres lacks a discernible pulse, while Ishi song maintains a strong one. Regardless of the structural differences between these works, the use of micropolyphony results in increasing the sonic potential of the instrument. In summary, Bresnick was a pupil of Georgi Ligeti and embraced several of his mentor's stylistic elements when crafting these pieces. Ligeti and Bresnick both favor micropolyphonic voices and acoustical sound experimentation to achieve the piano's full harmonic potential. However, Bresnick alters Ligeti's micropolyphonic process employed in atmospheres to ensure that individual lines are heard throughout each piece. Bresnick's polyphonic strategies, incorporation of elements from various genres, and unconventional acoustic explorations set him apart from other modern piano composers. Bresnick's compositional style offers unique soundscapes to the contemporary piano repertoire. Thank you once again for being here this evening. I hope this lecture will inspire you to explore Martin Bresnick's other compositions and discover the connections between his works and those of other contemporary composers. You can read more about Bresnick's other piano works and attain a performance guide, including his first-hand advice, in my DMA document titled Martin Bresnick's Piano Composition, an Analysis and Performance Guide. After a brief pause, I will perform these two magnificent works inspired by the polyphonic approaches of the Baroque era, Ligeti's micropolyphony, the folk traditions of the Yahi people, and the art of Goya, and the rhythmic underpinnings of Chopin's prelude. Thank you.